positive side, I think he was saying that this is also, from an economic perspective, a $275 trillion opportunity. That in order to get to net zero, $275 trillion will need to be deployed, and $130 trillion is already lined up to be spent. The other positives he was mentioning is that even with this war in Ukraine, which is going to create a lot of instability in terms of supply chains around the world, food shortages, a lot of short-term dislocation and pain, that this could also be a catalyzing event and a rallying cry to actually start to address some of the demand-side issues we have in trying to solve this problem. But I think in the end, this problem is coming, it's real, and it's defining our generation and our time, and this is really a chance for us as an organization, as a community, to start to work together, to think deeply about how individually we can all start to make a contribution to solve this problem. There are many other problems that we need to deal with, and there are many things that we work on, but this is a defining problem. And I think it behooves us to spend a little bit of time, even if it's not our core issue, thinking about it and trying to deal with it. So without any further ado, I would love to come to our panelists and would wonder if you could each just give maybe a brief introduction in your own words about how you guys are working to deal with this problem. And then what are some of the things that you're most concerned about, and what are the things you're most hopeful for?
Is this on? Okay, great. So, as Natasha said, I'm a clinical psychologist by training, but about 8.5 years ago, I freaked out about the climate emergency. And then I had a kind of conversion experience where I realized, okay, well, I'll just do everything I can to try to protect humanity in the living world from this absolutely horrifying catastrophe. And that work has led me in some different places. I founded an organization called the Climate Mobilization, which introduced the campaign of climate emergency declarations, which started city by city, but then has gone totally global. It's a way to try to raise awareness about the fact that we are in an emergency. It's not a problem, it is an emergency. And I was a founding advisor at the Climate Emergency Fund, where I'm now the executive director. And we fund activists. We fund disruptive protest. We fund civil resistance. We fund scientist rebellion, who are scientists chaining themselves to banks and throwing blood onto the Spanish Parliament. And we fund Just Stop Oil, which is young people in the United Kingdom putting their bodies on the line to shut down fossil fuel infrastructure sites. And it's just a taste of what we do.
So I am profoundly grateful to be here today. Firstly, because it's so wonderful to see all of you in person. So many great old friendships, and Elliott used that lovely word family, and it really feels like that. And it's just a rejoicing moment to the heart after these last 2.5 years. Secondly, I do hope your families have been safe through this period. And that sense of love that we have, which we are no longer ashamed to use the word public forum, one of the things Synergos taught us over the last 20, 30 years, is surely the root of our engagement with our concern on this issue. And you and I spoke about this. And as we face it, and Mahatma Gandhi had this term, satyagraha, hold to truth. It didn't mean civil disobedience, it just meant hold to truth. And in that sense, you've asked us to be brief, so I'll just say, I think holding to truth right now is the most important way to deal with this emergency, and not go into any facile spaces. In the outer world, 3 dimensions, mitigation. I'm trying to, as I have for 30 years, work with our foundation to move India, the world's 3rd largest emitter, soon to be the world's 2nd largest emitter. Secondly, trying to work like Elliott does in the world of institutional finance, bringing the largest sovereign wealth funds, working with the G7 to try and move the needle on a very large scale, because we need that. Some of you were kind enough to be part of these discussions we've had about the fact we're not going to make it in the traditional mitigation pathways. So how do we buy the planet 10 years more so that the decarbonization pathways can work? And that's an area we're working on. And finally, in COP28 next year, I'm trying to hold a summit on removing carbon. I don't think we're going to make it without removing carbon and utilization with COP28. So those are the 4 things I'm doing. Why am I hopeful? Why am I concerned? Because we're at 40 gigatons of carbon this year. And I've asked everyone in the community at MIT and Cambridge, everyone else, where do you think we'll be in 2030? The lowest answer I've got, IPCC says we've got to be at 23 gigatons or 22 gigatons. The lowest answer I've got is 35 gigatons. People have gone up to 55 gigatons in the expert community. That is disastrous. That is not 1.5 degrees, that's not 2 degrees. We are burning up our planet very fast. That is what I'm concerned about, irreversible climate change. Why am I hopeful? I'm hopeful because of the love that will make you think of this as a day that you don't walk out of here without seeing climate as the most important issue, the most important issue, the most important issue that connects with every other issue you're working with, because this is our last chance. It's our last gasp. Thanks.
Thank you for this opportunity, and thank you, Synergos, for 35 years of giving. It's pretty remarkable. And really thank you for bringing Tero in here. I think that what he described as relationship is really fundamental, and it's so foreign from the way most in the West see the Earth. So let me give you a sense of the quick journey that I took. I spent most of my life working at Conservation International, drawing lines on maps to figure out how to do deals to protect big places and lots of species. When I stepped down as the CEO of Conservation International 5 years ago, I was talking with a group of scientists about where on this planet are the places that really capture the most carbon, and if they're destroyed, that loss of carbon is irrecoverable by 2050. And they drew these maps and talked about mangroves and forests, and then I asked a question, which was, whose territories are these? And what really surprised me, and it shouldn't have surprised me, but it did surprise me, was that a third of the Earth is still under the guardianship of indigenous peoples. And that's extraordinary. It used to be 100% of the Earth, but the resilience of withstanding 500 years of colonization and having the philosophical, cultural fortitude to still relate to their place. You know, as Tero described, the language which shapes their cultures, their territories which describes their language, just the way of being and relating, for me was really remarkable. And so I talked to some friends who are indigenous leaders, and we decided to create a new organization that's called Tero, which means Our Earth in the language of Esperanto. And we wanted to build a bridging organization, an organization that really focused on how do we become strong allies to indigenous peoples who are committed to the security of their culture, their language, their place, their way of being. And that's what we launched. And the board is 13 people, 7 are indigenous. The chair is a phenomenal indigenous woman. And then there's some non-indigenous peoples on as well. And the team that works there is the same, a multicultural group of people learning from each other. And the reason that this is, what we focus on is finding those communities that have the collective will, and collective is really important. It's not individual, it's not Greek, it's not elevating the individual, it's elevating the collective, that have the collective will to secure their places so that not only are their cultures healthy, but all humanity is healthy. And that's what we focus on. That's what we do. Our focus is in the northern Amazon, where we work with communities that have about 100 million hectares of territory, with something like 25 gigatons of carbon. With boreal people, subarctic, with massive territories where you can fit all of Europe, and in the Pacific Islands. But working with cultures all around the world, most significantly, not only supporting their effort to uphold their own places, but striving to think about how do we share with others who are not indigenous this simple idea that all other beings, all mountains, all rivers, are our relations. And if we can get there through storytelling, if we can get there through communications, if we can get there through listening, we actually have a shot at turning the tide. And that's why I'm hopeful, because what I find amongst all of these cultures is an enthusiastic energy for, we are here, we're ready to lead, we're ready to participate, have the humility to listen. So we have an opportunity if we can seize it.
Thank you all. I think I'm going to focus in the next question a little bit about the role of philanthropy and what philanthropy can do to help meet this time and this issue and to help create solutions that are necessary. I think what's unique about philanthropy is at its roots, it's the love of mankind. It should be the love of all. But I think the key word there is love, and that's that when you look at objective function, when you look at our current economic system, the primary objective function is, I would hypothesize, more of a fear-based paradigm, which is maximization of shareholder value, maximization of wealth, individual acquisition of things. And there's have been benefits to the system, but there are also consequences to it. And I think what's interesting to me about philanthropy is the ability to look beyond personal aggregation of wealth or personal benefit and look at collective benefit. And I would posit, even though there's only $4 trillion in foundation endowments relative to $180 trillion in investment capital, that is probably the most valuable pool of capital we have to affect change. But I think one of the issues I've observed is that market, that capital, has not been organized in an efficient way. There's a lot of heart, but there's not a lot of thought about how we deploy that capital more efficiently for the greatest effect. And I think, sorry for those people who are not into corporate finance, but the corporate finance nerd in me looks at things like this concept of a net present value, which is the way that we in the capitalist system have used to allocate capital to the most profitable projects, and it takes into account risk and return in time. And so I think if there's ways that we as a community can start to think about what is the highest and best use of our capital, how can we deploy it in a way which is going to be for the best effect, really, what is that methodology? How do we start to use this idea of a carbon mitigation at present value, or just what is the best and highest use of our capital? And I'd love to go to each of you to think, if you were to look at the $4 trillion as a way that could be used to move markets, it could be used in many different ways to help bring public and grassroots movements to the fore that can unlock the wisdom of our native and indigenous peoples. What would be your pitch on how that $4 trillion would be used to basically get us to where we need to get to, which is we have a very small time span to do it, and we have huge things we need to accomplish. So I give you the gift of $4 trillion. How do you deploy that to solve climate change in the next 10 years? And if you don't want to answer that larger question, maybe just some thoughts for how you think philanthropy could be more effectively used
the most superficial answer, since I've been given the mic, Peter, very generously, is use the 4 trillion to get the 180. Sorry, the 4 trillion to get the 180 trillion to focus on what it needs to. So that's the superficial answer. And I think there's so much that we can do in that direction. And we could dig down into that, but I think that has not been done well yet. It's still just scratching the surface of what we can do to make that happen. There's been some wonderful things in the last 2-3 years that are doing that, and Neely is not here today, but people like that working in that domain. That's the superficial answer. I think the deeper answer is that with that ability not to just pursue profits and to bring heartfulness, we're able to see spaces that capitalists can't see. Just the pure money motive. Capitalism is incredibly efficient. Anything you want to do, there's someone trying to do it. I don't know about you, Elliott, but I've found over the last 30 years, a huge white spaces where no one's just doing it. And if you just lead and create collaborative coalitions, such as the coalition Synergos creates, you can move mountains on policy, on the creation of flows of intelligence, knowledge, community building, that really are systemically punch way above the weight. I wouldn't be surprised if the 4 trillion actually can do more than the 180 trillion, just because it links people, which is why Synergos was created, as far as I understand it, many decades ago. And that is extraordinarily powerful in the climate community right now, and I could cite some examples. But I'm going to hand the mic over instead.
Yeah, I love this question. Thank you so much. And I want to pitch funding grassroots movements and funding direct action as the highest return on investment that philanthropic dollars can achieve. And a huge part of why is because there's virtually no money there. The Climate Emergency Fund gives away just a few million a year. We're very small, but we give it to organizations where $50,000, $100,000, $200,000, this allows them to go from an all-volunteer organization to having 1, 2 paid staffers who can devote all of their time to coordinating the rest of the volunteers. So one reason why grassroots activism has such a high return on investment is because you're utilizing a huge amount of volunteers who the funds provide them with training and recruitment and, like I said, a few core full-time coordinators, but the energy comes from people power and the love and desperation that more and more of us feel that we must protect our Mother Earth and our families through, escalating civil resistance. So I really like to think about bridging between the kind of capitalist mindset and the activists, and also bridging between philanthropy and activism. And so in terms of venture philanthropy, which is something I know that you're also engaged with, we look for organizations that can create breakthroughs. And they're often just starting up. So to go back to the example of Scientist Rebellion, we gave them their first and only grant thus far of $100,000. And with that, they mobilized 1,000 scientists globally to take direct action. And many of those actions have gone viral because the mode of communication is so different, right? When a scientist from the IPCC tells you, this is what's happening, and it's all very grim, of course, but it's a kind of communication like someone on the street saying to you, oh, there's a fire, okay? But if instead of saying it like that, the person is sprinting with terror in their eyes and they say, fire, that's a very different communication. And that is what we need, because the calm and objective and scientific way of communicating has not gotten through. And so by utilizing people power and being open to the courage and effectiveness of escalating civil resistance, which I know can make people uncomfortable, right? Activism feels risky, it's edgy. Are these radicals coming for us with pitchforks, right? What is this? And I feel, we need it. it's too late for the normal unfolding of political decision making. And so what we need, when I think about how can we possibly avoid catastrophic collapse, what we need is a collective awakening about our situation, right? As long as the vast majority of people in all sectors are able to maintain these kinds of psychological defenses and this mass delusion of normalcy, right? And planning for the future, and planning for your career and your retirement, and planning for your foundation's next 100 years or whatnot. That's not where we are right now. So yeah, I believe in the power of grassroots movements, and that philanthropy can empower them in a totally new way. And the good news is, $4 trillion, I mean, we don't even need that. We can, if we utilize the power of the grassroots. I mean, there was just last week this gift to Stanford to create a climate school. It was 1-point-something billion. I thought, when I saw that, is give that to the movement and they will solve this. So.
I agree. There's such a, first of all, everybody here is a philanthropist. Everybody here is here because you have a particular strong interest, whether it's education, whether it's food systems, whether it's environment. I mean, we're all here because we're giving and we're committed. And what's fascinating about the climate crisis is that every single thing that you are involved with is connected to the climate crisis. And so what we need to be thinking about for each of us is what's our passion and how does it fit into the solution that needs to be accelerated, and that's answers for why, how do we get businesses, how do we get nations, how do we get communities to think about what's in their long-term enlightened self-interest. And taking care of a healthy place for our descendants is essential. So I think that when we look at the technology solutions, I am not as interested in the technology solutions as getting philanthropic money, because the greed juices are going to really fill that up. There's a battle going on for the trillions of dollars of value in the energy systems. We don't need philanthropy to do that. That's going to be done because there's something available, and that's who's going to control the energy systems. And I am sure that there's going to be a remarkable transformation of the energy system that's going to come through breakthroughs in battery storage and renewable energy. And I don't think philanthropy needs to be there. I think instead, we need to be thinking about how do we actually give. I look at the world kind of a head in the sky and a feet in the mud approach. And the head in the sky is the big ideas and the policies that really reflect what governments want to say or do. And then feet in the mud is what really benefits a community. And how do you support a community? Because communities, I mean, if you look at this planet Earth, it really consists of pixels of communities. And every community has one priority. How do we take care of our children? That's a universal. It's every community on the planet Earth is thinking about their children. And so when I began to think about what's the most effective approach to accelerating the support of our planet Earth, it really came down to what we heard about earlier. It came down to these indigenous communities that control vast amounts of the earth and are fighting for their lives to keep those places healthy, are not looking for money to do it. They're looking for self-governance and rights and the room to be able to survive. They are there. They're committed. It's the most effective. You're looking at it from a dollars and cents perspective, and you're looking at it from what's it going to cost. It's the most efficient. But most significant, it is the heart of social justice. And it's that intersection of social justice with the health of this planet. And so when I think about how I would deploy a fraction of that, it would really be to do two things. One, to make those resources available for indigenous peoples. And two, as philanthropists, to recognize that we are in a power position and we need to give up that power position and actually think about, we trust communities to do the right thing, let's give them the resources and get out of their way. And there's a huge step that needs to be taken amongst all of us who are involved in philanthropy. And that step is, how do we make it easy for communities to receive resources instead of making it difficult for them to have access? The reporting, the legal work, all that stuff is a barrier to actually accelerating a distribution of resources to the communities that actually are going to take care of the parts of the earth that we need to make certain are secure.
Thank you. Natasha, do we have time to engage the audience at all, or are we basically...
You have 10 minutes.
We have 10 minutes, okay, so 15. Well, so maybe a few things, and Uday, I want to give you a chance to respond too, but I think maybe just some things to synthesize from this is that one of the things I hear you saying, and I agree with, oftentimes we think about philanthropy and everybody looks at money, right? Money is one asset. Everybody can be a philanthropist. We all have intellectual capital. Relational capital is sometimes the most valuable capital we have. We have brand capital, we have our temporal capital, and we have financial capital. And I would posit that all of these plays a role, but in the world of philanthropy, so much is focused on the money. Certainly that's important. But I think large global changes can happen with those other factors, your relational capital. I think Bill Gates, one of the big things he did to affect change in terms of health globally was something people talk about, was his relationship with an unknown government official. He took his jet to Beijing and he's laid out, that government official became President Xi Jinping, laid out the case for why smoking would affect GDP. In a very quick period of time, a whole set of legislation was passed within China, making smoking banned from many of the public places. So this is just relational capital. And so I think it's very important that we concentrate on these things. It doesn't take a lot of money. Sometimes it's the will, it's the thought, it's supporting people. The other piece I hear very importantly is that we need to look to change the power balance of philanthropy, that we need to listen to the native voices, the indigenous communities that have the knowledge. The answer's already there. We need to unlock those and unlock that power on the world. And I hear with Uday, which I think is saying that we don't have time. We don't have time for the economic system to figure this out. That philanthropy can play in a catalytic role in actually to move markets, much the way the governments have gone out there. You have large government initiatives. You have the Manhattan Project, not a wonderful outcome to create nuclear energy, but it was, or the race to the moon in the U.S. But there are ways in which we can create catalytic capital that can in fact move markets, which will help to unlock that 180 trillion. So I think that these are all important points, I think, and I'm very grateful for each of the panelists. I know we're at time. One of the things I would ask in the next 10 minutes is for the panelists to go to each of the tables and to sit on one of the tables. And what I would ask each table to engage in is this question. If you have no interest in climate, it doesn't matter. I think what it is, what knowledge that you have from your own field. I was just talking about my uncle as poetry. What does poetry have to do with mental health, which has to do with climate change? There are connections. So I'd love to each table to engage for 10 minutes with, if the panelists would be kind enough to sit with each of the tables, pick a table that you haven't sat at before. And maybe we could all have this conversation to start to ruminate on what can we do individually and collectively as a group of people who care about problems beyond ourselves, the collective good, to deal with this very time-limited, very pressing problem. And again, excuse me, this may not be your focus, but I believe even if your focus is on the arts, you have something to add. So try to think of yourself what it is that you can bring to this conversation, and we'll have 10 minutes to do that. So if you guys wouldn't mind doing that. Uday, you want to make one more comment?
I'd just like to respond on one point. Unfortunately, not the environmental puzzle, not the spiritual problem, but the climate problem is about the big numbers. Those big numbers over this decade. And therefore, I think the tyranny of or is something to be avoided. We can do all of the above. And when you then look at the mitigation side of it, those numbers are very well known. We know what those numbers are. And they are about energy. And they are about the food system. And they are about only certain countries. But we have to be brutally honest in ways that are difficult for us because we want to be inclusive. A long time ago, Climate Works came up with that framework. WRI then refined it, but we didn't have the courage to stick with that. But we don't have the time, as Elliott said. It's a few countries that matter. It's a few sectors that matter. And if we can just bring all our firepower to those pieces of the puzzle, we've got a hope of getting this thing done. And in terms of energy, what Growall did and NRDC EDF did to stop coal in this country, remarkable. India's entire trajectory has shifted because of philanthropy, not because of capitalism, and so forth. So we can cite real examples, which we don't have time for, and what Hal Harvey's done in China. So really, I would appeal to you, don't give up on the big carbon numbers. Net present value included, what can make a difference now?
Thank you, and I'm sure we could continue this conversation for many hours, but I think in the benefit of time, I would love for all of us as our community to try to engage at our tables in these small circles, small communities on this issue for 10 minutes. So if you guys wouldn't mind stepping off the stage and joining the group, and we can have the house lights come up and we can all sit down and hopefully have a fruitful and wonderful discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you.